Welcome to the listening show, a show you can listen to. But Zach, can you help me speak some things for people to listen to?
Yeah. What do you want them to hear?
Well, I'll leave that up to you, kind of. We have 3 potential topics. We had spent actually 3 different occasions, I think, just talking in your room about stuff.
Yep.
And we were like, we should save this for the show. So the 3 topics were children and raising them.
Okay.
The other one was, do people change?
Oh, I liked that one. I liked that topic.
And the third one was actually praying, because I think there's some things we could talk about. That
We talked about talking about praying?
We talked about praying. We didn't talk about talking about praying.
Oh.
I decided it might be a topic because we spoke about it, not because we agreed on it as a topic. So,
well, hey, I'd be down for any of those, and you get to pick 'cause it's your episode, my man.
No, you get to pick because that's what I said.
I don't want to.
Well, thank you for listening to this episode.
How far did we get into the topic about the second one that you listed?
Do people change?
Yeah.
We can just go after that one.
Well, I don't want to make that the question because I don't think that's a very good question. Because
I just wrote down whatever it was for us to navigate to whatever we're going to call the topic.
All right, lead the way, my man.
Okay. Well, so we kind of disagreed on the idea that, I haven't formulated my idea, so it's not like we're really disagreeing, but I have this idea, not belief, I'd call it an idea, that people don't really change. I put something to you, and one of the things I said was, I think everybody is really just the same age. We're going to have to try to kickstart some of the things we talked about.
Yeah, but you're going to have to really clarify those 2 stances because they're both just factually incorrect. Because people do change and people aren't the same age. So you're going to, right away, you have to.
Yeah, the burden of proof is on me because I'm saying bullshit
you're saying
right
a bunch of retarded
and
nonsense.
all I got is to spew talking points that I remember from when we were talking. So one thing I think I said, this is going to be a mess to get through, but we'll get there, I think. One of the things I think I said was an example of specifically this one. If we ourselves were transported, was it transported or we got young bodies? I don't know if it matters. But let's just say we get our consciences, the word I'm trying to say. Consciousnesses. But there's 2 of them. Mm-hmm. Is that the right word?
Okay.
Consciences. No, whatever.
Consciousnesses.
I think that was it. The way it just sounds wrong. We got our brains sent back to our younger
consciousness.
Body. Those.
Yeah.
Consciousness times 2. Sent back in time, whatever.
A whole flock of conscience-eye. Conscience-y.
Consciencensus. That's all of the consciousnesses.
Conscience. Oh, it's not consensus.
It's consciencensus.
Yeah.
That's the word for all.
Oh, a census of our consciousness. Mm-hmm. Consciousness and census.
Yeah. It's a compound word.
Consciousness census.
A human unit mine would be the consciencensus.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I made that a word now. That's my thing. The idea that, let's see if this goes anywhere. Imagine you got your consciousness sent back in time 20 years ago. So you're 6 years old, but you have all the intelligence and the life experiences of yourself now. I think we'd agree you live your life differently, but I think that example didn't work for me because we're too young. So I try to imagine yourself 20 years from now being sent back to right now. So suddenly I'll have the experience of 20 years from now.
That's just the same thing, but from the future.
Yeah. It is, but it's a little bit more even because it's more like 20 years of age versus 40 versus 6 and 26. I don't know. I don't know if it matters because I don't even know what point I'm trying to get to exactly or where this idea came from, but I feel it, which is not a good, that's why it's
pretty bad. Well, this has been bad all the way because not only you're using to prove your point, you're using something that disproves your point. And I'll explain it this way. So your theory is that
it's not a theory. It's just an idea.
Well, your idea is that people are the same throughout time because what they are is one thing, right? Largely. So what you just did, that example you gave, disproves that because if you were to send your consciousness back 20 years, we both agree that you would behave differently.
Yeah.
So that proves that you're not the same thing you were when you were 6 as you are when now that you're 26 or whatever.
I hadn't finished.
Okay.
I know there was more. I just don't know what it was. So, despite the fact that you would act differently, regardless of your age, just trying to get that out of the way,
Okay.
you would still most likely act in service of yourself, even probably more so, because whatever knowledge you would have, and this doesn't mean you have changed necessarily, but you're not selfish. You're still self-serving. You are still your highest. I think so. Most people, maybe not you and me, whatever you want to make the exception. If I'm this old and I go back in time and I'm like, now I'm really gonna benefit from this, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But
can I just point out that that's the truism of being, because every single thing that exists is out to self-serve. It's like that's what existing is. It's to keep yourself sufficient, or it's everything that exists is self-serving. It's mass against mass, but the greater mass will win in the end. Anyway, so that has nothing to do with yourself. That just has to do with being something in the universe.
I'm not going to any particular point, so this may all fall apart. I'm just talking out an idea and hoping that I can figure out something, but I haven't gotten there yet. So if I'm not annoying, I'm going to keep going.
I just don't know where you're going. It seems like you're talking in circles.
I can stop if you want.
Well, keep going, but if I find you just stumbling back to the same stuff, then I'm going to tell you.
I'm going to have to retire it until I think of something else, because I don't have anything that's worth sharing. It's just an idea.
Well, okay, that's what the show's about. So
yeah, I thought it'd be worth.
That's why I'm not saying stop what you're doing. I'm saying keep going, but I'll tell you if you start circling back again.
No, I haven't got a place to go to right now, so I'll have to retire it, unfortunately.
Okay.
I know there's more to it, but I don't have it right now. So
when we talked about this the other day, we didn't explore it too deeply, and what we did say about it, I sort of shot across the bow, gave you my perspective, and it's that my idea of what people are is a thing that continuously dies and is reborn. And so not only do you change as a person, you can never be the exact same as you ever were. Like, and that doesn't mean that no part of you is ever the same, because certainly parts of you are always the same.
Yeah, I remember some of that now. And I don't know if I said this. I was thinking it. Of course, you're always changing. I'm different a second ago than I was a second ago. Yeah, sure. We got into technicalities. I think you technically always change, but you're also always technically the same person.
It's harder to figure out how you're the same as you used to be than it is to find the ways in which you're different.
Those are easy if you're looking for them. So
I don't think they are. Tell me one. Give me an example.
Okay, so a child's personality becomes apparent pretty quick, and a lot of those traits will remain for the rest of their life.
Like
some
what?
Things won't change. Maybe you're very animated and photogenic, and you're very expressive. And that may last forever. Maybe it will absolutely change. Maybe trauma or something will happen. But some things won't change, or not everything has to change. I don't know if this is a good example. It's kind of like putting a generalization or a broad label on something, like saying Christian. We don't like that word because it comes with it it's a package deal. You have to be all 100 of these things to be a Christian, but that's not how that works.
Right.
So somebody may change 90 things about themselves, but 10 of them are exactly the same from the moment they're born to the moment they die. And when they go back in time and try to live their life better for themselves, they won't change something.
Okay, but I want to point out there's a difference between exactly the same and very similar. And so personality, there's no personality that's the exact same as it was when it was even yesterday.
And I can't say, just like you can't say, because technically I can't say nobody changes. Of course, we all change all the time.
Yeah.
But you also technically, and I hate that, can't say that everybody changes, because I'm still the same person I was when I was born.
But you say that, but you're not. You're not. Even your personality is different than when you were born. There are staples. There are things that are foundational. But I would argue that personality is not one of them too. Because the things about my personality that were definitely the case when I was a kid, maybe it still leans. It's more than 50. If it's extroversion, maybe it's still more than 50%, but it's certainly not the exact same percentile of extroversion I was when I was a kid. So I don't even think personality is like a foundational thing to a person.
I think we can agree to this unless I maybe change my mind. I don't think I will. We can agree that people change more than they remain the same. If it's a 50-50 thing, they're on the side of change.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So that's not hard. So maybe the idea that people don't change is not, I'm not saying 100%. Like, some people, some things about them, I think, at least one thing. Like, okay, yeah, right, the 1% argument. I can't say, and I don't believe that any one person changes 100%. Now, you can say, yeah, everything changes all the time. Like, I don't think so. I think something stays the same.
What?
I don't know. It could be a different thing for each person.
Yeah, well, okay. So tell me, maybe this is more accurately your theory, and correct me because I just want to know what your actual theory is. It's
a feeling. It's not even a theory.
Yeah,
I don't have an argument for it.
Well, okay, but so acknowledging that most things are not foundational to a person's being, but I think the only thing that you would back as an idea, maybe, or as a feeling, is the idea that some things are so foundational that they never change, and you don't exactly know what those things are. Is that true?
Sounds right.
That sounds right. Okay, so let's try to figure out what those things are. Those foundational things to a person that never change. Because I actually don't know that they're. Technically, I think that's God. If there is one thing that doesn't change about people, that's where I would put in. That's what I put in
like
God
you're
territory.
Saying something outside of the person.
Yeah. I don't. So I basically think almost everything about a person can be changed. Not only is changeable, but changes a lot constantly. I mean, in a literal sense, like even like your biology, every 7 years, every like cell in your body has been replaced at least once. So even from like in 7 years time, like no part of your body is the same as it was 7 years ago, except for parts of your teeth.
Yeah. I think we'd start getting toward what you said, Guy. What would you call that? External things. So I had a specific thought, not memory, not life experience. You may change so much from the beginning of your life to the very end. You may look back and feel completely disconnected. Like, I don't know that person, but you are that person. For example, you could murder somebody and then have a huge life change and pay your sentence and go so many years in the future and do so many great things. You are still a murderer. So that's what I mean by, but that sounds kind of extraneous. Is that the right word? It's a circumstance. It's not really who you are. It's something that's outside of you, but maybe it is.
Yeah.
It kind of is.
But that also proves what I believe to be the case. And that's that one day this person who was not a murderer, but then they were a murderer. So by your definition, if they've always been the same, they will have always been a murderer, but they weren't at one point.
But you can't say he changed, therefore he doesn't have to serve his sentence.
No. But what I'm saying is that proves the point of what a person is not ever this, or is always the same, and that's not true, because then when this kid was born, they were born a murderer. They just hadn't murdered anybody yet, and I don't think you believe that.
Well, that's a question of fate and destiny,
right?
Which is another topic.
I know, but that's what I think you're saying.
We can segue to it. Maybe it has some answers about who you are. If you want, I'm kind of.
This is where the conversation flows.
I heard conversation and I started hearing Cotton Eye Joe. Conversation flows, Cotton Eye Joe is what I heard.
If it hadn't been for conversation flows,
I would have
figured this shit out a long time ago.
That's coming from the watching show. We had this gag going on. We keep talking about Cotton Eye Joe.
We brought it up on the last listening show as well, because we talked to good old Joe.
Oh, we did?
Yeah, we did.
Yes, we did. Shoot, it's pervasive then, huh?
Yeah, it's invading the listening show.
And copywritten. It's a copywritten idea. Yep. We should probably stop. Now let's double down. That's going to be a new intro song next week for the listening show. It's to slow down to the tempo. Cotton Eye Joe, I've been married a long time ago. Where did you come from? Where did you? Hey, welcome to the listening show.
Yeah. We could do that. We could literally, I could press this.
Probably, if it's 5 seconds.
Cotton Eye Joe, I've been married a long time ago. Where did you come from? Where did you go?
You gotta fade though.
Yeah.
5 seconds overlaid with our own beat. We could probably legally get away with that.
I mean, I just did. Yeah. That's great.
All right. Let's directly connect fate to changing as a person. You said something about murder, and you said
you brought up murder as an example.
I was like using extremes, because if you can't prove it with an extreme, good luck proving it with something banal.
Yeah.
So let's say a murderer is born, and you said that this isn't something you think I hold to, which implies you don't seem to believe this either, that if a child is born and a murderer, and that's set in stone, more or less. Can you say if you agree to that or not, or is that too confusing an idea? Can you say,
so
I
if
mean,
you
maybe
separate
God can say, but what about the universe? Or,
Okay, so if you separate yourself from time, then yes, they're born a murderer.
Okay.
But time matters to us. So while we're in the confines of time, that parameter matters. So I can't say that I believe a child was born a murderer. Adolf Hitler was born a person who murdered, right? But because when he became a murderer, that's what he is then.
Which obviously
proves the point of that everybody changes,
Right.
and therefore you are never what you used to be. Now that's a good thing, and that's a hopeful thing and a bad thing, because if you keep making bad choices, you just become a worse person. And the other way around obviously is the case. So
that reminds me, maybe this connects to, maybe you can just dismiss it. That reminds me of our conversation about good and bad people.
Yep. It's the same conversation, yeah.
Do all three of those things? Well, first of all, before I ask it that, if I can't forget about it, fate, destiny, really quickly, if you can you tell me what you think about it? Do you think that we're destined to do? It sounds like, I won't put words in your mouth. It sounds like, no, nothing is set in stone.
I think it is set in stone if time isn't a factor, for sure. Well, if you remove time,
since time is a factor,
for us it matters.
But
so, for example, this is where the conversation gets confuses people about God, right? God is outside of time, and so he doesn't see everything. He doesn't see the way that we can interact with a 4-dimensional thing and we watch as it changes as it goes. He sees it as a 2-dimensional thing that was put on paper. So, in that sense, he knows what all is going to happen. Therefore, he's outside of time, and therefore to him, it doesn't matter.
I partially, if not mostly, agree with that. But
now, because we're inside that 4th dimension, everything in the dimensions below 4th dimension, in that sense, have to matter or don't. We can do nothing to change that 4th dimension where time gets involved or whatever. We're not outside of that. Therefore, it matters to us. It's being written with us, so it does. I don't know that I'm saying it in a way that makes sense, but it makes sense to me. So, for instance, to us, the things in the 2nd dimension are set in stone. They've already been written down.
Yeah.
We can read a book that's all in 2 dimensions, and this can no longer be changed other than if we drew another thing on top of it, and then that can no longer be changed, right? But that's how God sees how the 4th dimension works, and therefore he can rewrite things where we can't.
I think I understand. I think
it's very complex.
And
it's very difficult.
The word is perception. We can't see the future. God can see the future. What we perceive as too complicated or outside of our grasp, time, God sees on linearly, very simply.
Yes.
And so therefore, we don't really have the agency that God does, for example. Is that pushing it, or is that?
No, you're right. I am not smart enough to convey I can imagine it in my head perfectly, but I'm not smart enough to convey that.
We can't perceive it. It's like describing the 4th dimension. Like, well, we don't perceive it, so good luck describing it.
Yes, the fish in the bowl can't replace his own water.
Is time the 4th dimension?
It's either the 4th or the 5th, and I don't remember which one.
Well, anyway. All right.
I got a super long wrist hair. It's like this long. Oh, that's weird.
Prove it. You want to hear something weird about hairs?
Look at. I'm still pulling it from.
I can't see it, but I believe you. I'm looking where it would be, and it. Oh, that was so real.
I got it.
You couldn't pantomime that.
Yeah.
Do you want to know something weird about hairs as an interjection, since you interjected with it?
Yeah, hard.
Okay. I have an inch long hair on either shoulder.
I have like 7 to 20 of them.
But I have just one on either shoulder, and they stand out. They're like, I have no hair anywhere else really, but there they are. So I think I'm an X-Men. I think I'm starting to grow wings, and that's all I got.
One hair at a time?
No, just where the wings would be. Just one specific, this is supposed to be a wing. It's coming. Or the generations later.
On your shoulder wings. They're not even from that.
Hey, I didn't make this stuff. That's just how it is. That's how wings. Anyway.
Cool.
Cool.
Yeah.
Should write that in my profile or something.
I started off with one on each shoulder, and then I had there'd be another one. Now there's like 6 on this side and like another 5 or something on this side.
That's unfortunate.
They're not noticeable. I look like a soft boy still, and I could just pluck them out.
Like a soft boy.
I do. I look like a soft boy.
That's funny, but that's an apt description as opposed to a burly, hairy man. I don't fit that description.
Yeah.
All right. Off of that for a moment. So let me see if I can do this. I don't know if I remember all the details, but let me try to draw all three conversations and then take your perspectives and lay them on top of one another and see if they are not conflicting. So number one, no particular order, fate. For us, it's not in stone, but it is in stone. I gotta figure that out more before I. Okay,
it is from another perspective.
For us,
from the
which is all I'm interested in currently. It's not. No, it is set in stone. Sorry, for us, it is set in stone.
Wait, it is from the outside dimensional perspective. So from the fifth or sixth dimension.
For us, it's not set in stone.
Yes.
Sorry. Okay, for us, it's not set in stone. So which means we don't have fate for us. Whatever. The other thing was, it wasn't children. We didn't talk about that. Fate. Changing. People do change all the time. And what was the third thing we talked about? It was very brief. Do you remember what it was? I can't.
Doesn't matter.
No, it does, because I almost asked you if any of those three ideas or positions you had on those three different things, whatever they were, that was two of the three, if any of them conflicted. But I can't do that if I can't recite them to you and have you confirm each one so that I can go, but I don't remember the third one was, so I have to abandon it. Dang. We went to the hair thing and I forgot. Okay. I'm going to give up on the people don't change thing, but I think I should offer my perspective on fate. So it's not very well fleshed out, but as a general stance, we make our fate. There is no set in stone. And the simple reason for that is because of free will. If free will is what allows us to exist, and I have a whole spiel I'd like to talk about free will if you want to go there. It basically is fate. But that basically, I think, no, nothing's in stone. God may know. For him, it might be two-dimensional. He can see where you're going. But for us, it's absolutely up to us to decide.
I think God sees the dimension that we are in the same way he sees a book that both has been printed already and he can change whenever he wants. So the same way that we can look at a book, this is finished, and color on it, God can do the same thing. He can rewrite our present as...
I think he can write Yeah. I was going to say, I think he can write circumstantially, like a fork in the road opened up before him. He can do that. But I mean, I think he could say, and then the character, you in this story, felt compelled to do this and just did this, and you're overcome by the spirit, maybe. And obviously he can do whatever he wants, but I don't think he does that to people. I don't think he just makes this person do something because...
Can you justify it?
Can I justify it?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if this justifies it, but I want to go into why I think free will is so damn important. That's my answer to why does God allow bad things to happen? And I think we talked about that. And I said, because free will. Because the first thing God did is he said, you can choose. I'm going to let you choose between the tree of life and the tree of knowledge and good and evil. If he didn't do that and he just took the trees away, what are you? I'll tell you what you are. You're a freaking robot. You have no agency. You can't do right or wrong. It doesn't exist. And the only way it can exist is if you choose it. If you're given, that's what free will is. So let me rant for just a minute. People ask, why has God let bad things to happen? I say, because we chose it. That was our first decision, basically. And we continue to have the ability to choose. And the bad things that happen, like natural disasters, are just a consequence of that choice. And originally that wasn't the plan. But God's like, okay, this is what you wanted, and we'll choose us over God often. Anyway, it wasn't about fate. What was the question? What was I supposed to defend or explain? You said it's up to me to explain it. You seem irritated, like I detracted from what it was you wanted.
I just wish that you'd remember your own things you want to go on, because I can't. I'm following your lead. So
okay.
I actually understand your logic with that whole idea, and it's a narrative that makes sense to me, and it could be what I believe. I tend to believe more of the Calvinistic viewpoint, which is that when you said if all decisions, oh man, what did you say? It was something.
Free will was my answer to fate.
Yeah, at some point you said if you're not deciding for yourself, then you're just a robot, a placeholder. And I actually believe that that's a little bit more accurate than you do. I think that that's more the case. And it's not
Accurate than what? Like, what do you mean?
like what we are just are really, really, really complex robots.
Oh,
I believe more in the not free will side of things.
you think we don't have free
I believe in the
will?
illusion of free will.
You believe in the illusion of free will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Explain that.
All right, it's going to be difficult, but here we go. An experience that is preordained is no less real when you're the one experiencing it.
All right, slow down because I think I know what that means, but I want to understand it before you continue.
Okay.
So
An
sorry
experience that is preordained feels as real as if it wasn't preordained to the person.
Bad analogy. The Matrix. You think it's real, and for all intents and purposes, the Matrix is real.
It is real
in your reality.
It's really
real,
preordained.
But
really
anyway,
preordained.
Got it.
But that doesn't mean it's not real to us, right? So it's so I believe, and I actually believe that one of the cool things about believing in God, believing in that person who is the preordainer, it gives you as an entity some impact into the preordaining of your life. So that is where the free will comes in. It's never my will. The free will is more like God's will, and God's will kind of aligns with yours sometimes. That's why it's important to align yourself with God as much as possible. That's kind of my belief on things. Now, because the experience of something, people get really bothered by the whole I don't have free will argument, and I did for a long time at first until this is the ultimate reason that I can't believe everything built on free will. And it comes down to the idea of, well, then he's not an all-powerful God, right? Because if we're making the decisions for ourselves, then he's not really the one doing it.
I disagree, but continue.
Okay,
so you know where I stand.
So but for instance, some people would argue a person could blow up the world and God wouldn't stop us because he allowed us the free will to pick that thing. And that makes sense too. I'm not saying that that's not true at all. I believe slightly differently. I believe that if there was, because here's what I believe God is, and this is what he is to me. And I believe the Bible also supports this, but I believe God is in his natural state of storyteller, which is why I think storytelling is so important.
Yeah,
and I believe he is in the service of the idea to tell the greatest story ever told. Because what would you do if you had infinite access to everything in the universe? What would you want to do? Is you want to create something beautiful, the most beautiful thing. So in essence, I believe that he is, and also because he's the greatest thing ever, the most perfect and wonderful thing. If he makes stuff, he wants that stuff to experience him, because it's like, there's nothing better. It doesn't get better than this. So let's make a story that takes the worst possible thing the worst possible thing I can create, which is a person, something that can not only does evil accidentally, but can do it with intent. So that's the worst thing. I'm going to take that worst thing and make it the best thing. And I'm going to imbue it with myself. It's a beautiful story if you think about it. It's like, I'm going to take the worst thing and turn it, because something is just so pure that I can even turn this. So that's the story of humanity. In that sense, I believe that he's in the service of telling a better story. If people were going to get in the way of that, then he would intervene.
Man,
this is why I believe that, because he already has, at least narratively. When people were going to make it too far gone from his story, he just got here and he fixed it. He literally sent his son, at least in the story. So I don't know that that's the way I substantiate that belief in God, and there being predestination.
I'm not gonna be able to remember all your. Oh, sorry, you're not done.
Yeah, no, but
go ahead.
But that's not to say that you have no input in what happens in your life. It's more like you think you have input and you can do everything and it feels real to you the whole time you're doing it. Now, if you're aligned with God and you can communicate with him, you can actively participate in the shifting of your life to something greater, because that's what God's about. So I believe that it's free will is for all the people who are with God, but I don't believe it is necessarily with other people. And it's very tough. I tried to substantiate it, and it goes deeper. I can't try to keep going, but I don't know if I
got enough points to talk about. You're going to
go ahead
now. I'm not going to be able to remember all the points. Summary, I agree with probably half of what you said.
Yeah.
I do think that stories are important because that is the nature of existence, and that's what God created and all that. I disagree that God is in service to a story, because I think God is in service of nothing.
Well, he's in
As
service
in-
of himself.
He certainly isn't in service to a story that I'm participating in. That's he's not subject to anything.
No.
I
Only
disagree
himself. Only himself.
I disagree that free will doesn't.
I also didn't say that he believed in the story more than that he's in service of the greatest story ever told more than himself, because he's in service to himself, and in doing so, he creates based on that. So anyway, go ahead.
I also disagree that free will is only allotted to those who are in commune with him. But that's not
I don't
too
really
crude.
I don't believe in free will. I oversimplified it when I said that I believe in free will for the people who are in unison with him, or in frequency alignment with him, because I don't believe that either. I believe that you can participate in the reshaping of your future, but it's not you the one doing it. I don't believe in free will for anyone.
Okay. Well, there was one other point I was going to agree or disagree with, but since I don't remember, I'll move on to the next thing, which is a point in the conversation to use the crude dimension perception analogy again. So maybe we can agree on this analogy to play with. Let's say our crude representation of God in existence is someone playing with toys on a board, on a table.
Okay.
My position is, okay, again, things I agree and disagree with. What's the greatest thing? If you have access to everything, what could you do? And what'd you say specifically? What would you do if you had everything and everything? You said you'd make something that, was it pursues you? What did you say? It's not super important.
It's a complex analogy, so I don't know if I should rehash it all
don't worry
out.
about it. It's not important. My position is, you're God. Imagine the person at the table. You have access to everything. I can't think of anything better to do than to create something that literally works for itself. Now, you could make toys that are inanimate, and you imagine you move, these guys go over here, whatever. He could do better. And this would be hard to do, but imagine you give these toys life and you go, I want this army to invade over there. Okay, you guys do that. And I'm talking to them, and that's fun, but one level more interesting, one level more. And this, because God is good, he loves everything. This is the key with free will. It's he loves everybody. He wants the best for everybody, but you can't have good happen to everybody and they can't be alive. You don't get, if I loved them, I'd say, okay, you get to choose. You can, I hope the best, and I'll guide you as best as possible, but you guys do whatever you want. Because as soon as you grab and you just start moving pieces around, that's not alive anymore. So for me, I can't understand life without free will. I think everything is choice, and God allows that because he loves you.
And I get that if they have to operate on the same dimension and level as us, but if you think literally, this is where the examples have blown people's minds about just the space in which we live in the universe. If you get closer to a black hole, literally time will go by faster. And so from some perspectives that we even can prove and know about now, time doesn't work the same for some things, for some perspectives. Now, if you remove God from perspective and then you also give him like freaking Minecraft creator mode ability and he could just manipulate everything and he's outside of time, what that means is to things that are subject to the Minecraft block, I can't really think of a good example. It's impossible to fathom the ability to be outside that. All you know is I can make my own choices, and things that I do impact my life as I currently see it. So you wouldn't even know if you were being manipulated.
Yeah.
As a concept.
If we lived in the Matrix and we've never seen the outside of it and we can't prove it, how will we know that we live in the Matrix?
Yes. And definitionally you can't prove it. Right. But it is real to you. And in the moment you are making your own choices.
I understand your perspective.
And you have the ultimately, it doesn't really. So if like we could never communicate with that extra dimension, then it wouldn't matter because everything would be free will and nothing would matter. Ultimately, that's the that's the conclusion that you'd come to eventually, is that, well, we're just doing stuff and eventually the universe explodes. So why does it matter what we do?
It's interesting because we agree in this dimension. I'll use the word dimension.
Yep.
We agree that we have free will, but you hold that on the dimension above,
Yes.
this free will isn't really free will.
Yes.
Which is ironic, not ironic, but harder for you. It's the burden's on you because now you're holding to something that you can't prove.
Yes.
I'm more or less living in this dimension as you can't blame me. It's like, I understand your position.
No,
I understand mine, but the burden's on you now.
Yeah. Well, here's the point. And that's why I hold this belief, is because when I had the belief of free will, I just kept coming to the same problems. And the same problems were something like, well, God's not a good God if he allows bad things to happen, and bad things happen. And then, you can keep going back to the argument, but well, people make all bad things happen, but people don't make storms happen, and people don't make the universe freaking have sun rays that explode and hit the earth and eventually destroy the atmosphere and kill all life. Like, people don't create all the bad things for people. So at some point you get into, oh, well, the universe is a terrible place, so God must be a terrible being if he created the universe. And I didn't believe that. So I had to come to a belief that incorporated all the things I know about the universe that I experience, and also what I believe to be true about God, which is that God is good. And ultimately it has to do with creating the ultimately good story. Now, and it's not in a vacuum, the idea of we're not completely robots either. It's like when God involves himself with people and he creates a tether between the two dimensions, you technically have ability to communicate with this external thing outside your dimension. That can change what happens in your dimension too. So it's not just a free will thing. It's also when you're in accord with that extra dimensional thing, all of a sudden it impacts the experience you have in your dimension, right? That's why it's important. That's why and that's kind of what I meant about my very, very rough and not very flattering oversimplification of the idea that people who are in communion with God can have some experience in free will. I don't really believe free will as a concept. I think ultimately from the perspective of God doesn't exist, but from our perspective, it's exactly what exists.
So be generous and operate in this dimension. Yes or no, do you believe if free will exists?
In our dimension?
Yes, that's the question. Yes or no?
That's like asking a person who wears glasses and doesn't know he's wearing glasses. Do you see through these glasses?
I know.
It's like,
I understand that.
Of course, you can't not see through the glasses. The glasses that we're wearing is the glasses of free will.
You're going to make me rephrase what you said then, which I don't want to do.
But let me do it then, because you
don't even know what I'm getting at.
Okay, so I'm talking about the dimension that we live in. That's the same as you wearing sunglasses that you've only ever seen everything through your sunglasses. The person who's not wearing sunglasses knows what things look like outside of sunglasses, okay? So only if you ask someone, is the world always kind of this shade? Then it's like, yeah, it always is and always will be, because you don't even know how to take the sunglasses off.
We've explained that.
Okay.
I didn't.
You're going to explain? Okay, go ahead.
That's not what I'm talking about.
What are you talking about?
What I'm trying to ask is if I have to say if, because you didn't reaffirm these points for me. If you think that we don't have free will, and if you think that God is good, and if you think that, well, natural disasters aren't a result of us, how can you maintain that God is good when natural disasters happen?
Because ultimately, I'd have a different definition of good and bad. That's an argument.
That brings me back to earlier, and I was trying to layer the three because that was one of them. I think that was the one I missed.
No, it wasn't.
Okay, well, unless there's something specific you want to go toward, why don't you try answering that for me and answer with your definition of good and bad? Why does God let bad things happen?
Well, before we get there, it sounds like what you're asking me is how do you justify...
I'm not asking you to justify anything yet. I'm trying to understand what your stance is on some things. Because you sell these things, but now I'm wondering, what do you think about
the final note on free will is, to us, it's free will.
Uh-huh.
So I believe in free will as an idea, right? Because it exists for us. It clearly exists for us. But I'm saying from a more accurate perspective, the perspective of the person above it all, the fifth dimensional perspective, it doesn't exist. So what really matters is it's more...
I understand. It's more true.
If
The
you're-
highest dimension is the most accurate, most
Yes.
truthful. I understand
So the
that.
most accurate thing is to believe that free will doesn't exist. But technically for us, I have to behave as though it does because I'm not outside that
I
yet.
understand it. I mean, are you explaining this to me or to people listening?
Just whoever's listening.
Okay.
And so if you understand that, then you'd know, okay. So, but you don't believe free will. You believe free will exists on God's dimension too, is the difference in our two thoughts on things.
I think, unless you want me to dump this, I'm not really willing to let it go. I'm not in total disagreement because I think God's looking over the board and said, you guys can have this. And obviously he could have said, no, I'm just going to make everything good. But then I don't think you'd be alive. I don't think good and love could exist in our dimension.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, is God responsible? Yeah. He could have done us all a huge favor and not made us in the first place. That would have been better. Some people would say.
Well,
some people would say, whatever.
Yeah.
Ultimately, because God is the highest dimension, has the utmost power, it's his responsibility. I
and
get
it's
that.
the utmost good.
But
and
this is
because
what he
exists,
chose. He chose to let us choose.
So it must be good that we exist.
So it must be good.
Yes.
So I'm not in total disagreement, but the idea that, what was the only part of that I felt any kind of contention, I guess, was the idea that something about I can't remember. Anyway, do you want to try answering the question now?
What question?
Why does God let bad things happen?
Oh geez, we've talked about this before, and it's a tough one, but it has to do with the outside of our dimension thing. There's a good and a bad, and he can't help but do what's good. And so if you pull yourself from a different, you have to look at things from God's perspective to see the good. So for us, it is bad. When people die or when bad things happen, it's like, nope, it's only bad from this perspective. The ink has stained the paper.
I agree with that, and based on what I think, my thought is it's good because God allowed us free will, and a consequence of that is our choices, which has led to bad things. Mm-hmm. It's good that we have free will.
Yeah.
Because that allows for transcendence, all that.
I don't think we disagree about free will as a point. I think that what when you say God allowed us free will, it's like, yeah, he allowed us the illusion of free will. I believe the same thing too. I just don't think you think it's an illusion. I think we legit have the reins for our own selves, and that God is just sort of letting us, hey, you have at it. To me, another reason I have a problem with that as a philosophy is that that's a disconnected God. He literally chose to disconnect himself from us entirely. And
not entirely.
Other than he watches.
He watches and he talks to us.
Well, that's not just watching.
But he doesn't rob us of our choice. He never grabs you. How do I put this? He moves pieces around, but he allows the player, what do you want to call this? He allows them to choose.
Oh boy. I just don't.
I don't think we're puppets.
No.
I think we're animate objects on a board.
Yeah.
I think he could very well move us, but he chooses not to. And I certainly wouldn't say it's totally disconnected. I don't think that's accurate at all.
So there's a difference between he's the one doing everything, and like he's messing with everybody all the time, and he gets involved where he's invited to. There's a distinction there too, but I don't even believe in just that God, the God who is only acts when invited, because I believe the Bible shows many times where he acted uninvited. And they say that, and they say it very clearly as God came down and did this, and people didn't expect it. And that happens especially a lot in the Old Testament, but I think that it happens. I don't think the world changed in that sense. I think that the ways he acts are just so clouded by distractions and everything that people just don't see it, but it's happening constantly. And that doesn't mean he doesn't. Well, first of all, believe if God stops, everything else stops too. And so in that sense, he has to be active in literally everything, right? So that's one thing. So in some sense, without him, there's not the free will for us to participate in. I don't know. Boy, it's a complex conversation, and I can justify it. I just don't have the terminology.
That's okay. I can totally excuse you. I don't want to put a lot of burden on you because, I mean,
Well, it should be on me. If I'm going to try to answer one of the most important questions that exists, and I should have to justify it. And that's why.
It'd be great if you could, but you don't feel like I feel mad at you for not being able to describe it. I mean, we're talking across dimensions now, so no one's going to be able to do it. Give yourself a little break. You can give me a break too. And I don't know if this is important, but I was trying to say something to the effect of that love can't exist without free will. Imagine, so in our dimension, the closest we're going to get is making AI. Imagine programming a robot, whatever, free will, sentience, artificial intelligence. Now you program it to love you. How do you do that? We never get to define love, don't we? But how stumble through it? How would you program a robot to love you?
Well, the only way to feel an extreme of something is to offer it the spectrum, first of all. And so you have to give it the choice to hate you. So that's part of it.
You think so?
Yeah.
I think the same thing. I think if God made us and made us all good and programmed us all to love him, that it wouldn't be love. You can't.
I don't think he programmed us to love him.
I don't think you can have one without the other. That's my whole point of free will.
Right, but that's my point too, because if we were programmed to love him, then he wouldn't have created the most terrible creature possible. The whole point of that is that God is so wonderful, he creates a thing he designed to hate him, and we can't help but love him sometimes. That's the thing that's the kind of the spectacle about people is there's no natural thing about people that would go to say, what we want is subservience and what we want is all these rules and stuff. That's not what people are innately. People are innately, it's all about me and we worship ourselves and all we want is things that are good for ourselves. And anyway,
this doesn't necessarily disagree with you, but I think God is so good that he allowed us to hate him.
I think he made us to.
He loves us and wants us to love him, but he knows in order for some of us to love him, some of us are going to hate him, and that must hurt him. But he loves all of us so much that he allowed that.
Yeah, and the sad thing is that the people who hate him don't know him. It's the same idea. It's that if you know who God is, then you can't help but love him because it's like, oh, you're actually this. It's a surprise to people to discover that it exists. So, that's the thing that's the hard thing to contend with my philosophy. It's that why would he allow people to not get the chance to know him? And the reality is that if you pay attention, everybody has the chance to. That's the difference.
Yeah, well, that's free will.
Yeah, maybe.
Here's a talking point that I realize is kind of relevant. When we were talking about this before, I said something. I said, I have this saying that isn't a new one. You can't please everyone. And I try to amend it and make it more important. And I said, even God can't please everyone. And then you said, I think you said, wow, it's so interesting the way you think. And I was like, I don't know what that means. Does that mean you disagree? Or like, oh, it's just different. I'm like, okay, well, you want to talk about that later? So anyway, based on everything we talked about, like free will, that might be.
Go ahead.
I don't know how profound you think that. I just was trying to make something more profound and at the very least original. And the main question is, do you agree or disagree with that? Even God can't please everyone. Now, based on what you said, it sounds like you're saying, of course, God can please everyone. It sounds like that.
If that was what was ultimately the best story, if the best story in the universe was for us to feel pleasure, then yeah, that's what God would do. But I think it's a better story for people to experience pain and then the spectrum, the full spectrum, the deepest pains and then the deepest pleasures.
I feel like I have to explain. The whole point of that, again, was to be original, but also it's like, it's supposed to be just a truth. I think you can say like, the point is you can't please everyone. Even God can't please everyone. That's all it means.
I don't believe that.
But if we're being literal, like it's a profound thing to say. Like now it's a sermon. You got to actually like prove or disprove. Technically, of course, God could please everybody, I think.
So then it's more true to say then God doesn't please everyone.
Yeah, that's more true.
Yes.
If we're talking in our dimension, God doesn't please everyone. That would be a true thing for our dimension. But because of how we think about the dimension above, of course, God can please everybody. That's more or less we agree on, right?
Well, yeah.
Okay. All right.
But even that, I don't know that that's...
And I get that.
I think the only way we can say that as a truth is that you can look at the evidence and say that everyone is not pleased. Therefore, God doesn't please everyone. Now, that might be oversimplifying it because there might be a reason he's not doing that. Maybe that's not the ultimate way to pleasure.
And I agree that phrase
Right.
isn't technically true.
Pleasure isn't really one of those ultimate feelings either. There's like base feelings and pleasure, and on nobody's smart's idea of things that matter is pleasure on the top of the list. There's things more meaningful than that. So maybe it doesn't matter that we don't all feel pleasure.
I got another topic slightly, if you want to jump.
Okay.
I had a thought. You said something about pleasure, but I think you specifically said there's a difference between pleasure and happiness. I don't know if you said that, but my thought before was there's a difference between happiness and joy. And so now my thought is there's the Trinity, whatever. Pleasure, eating cake. I don't know, eating candy. Next level up, happiness.
I don't know. I think pleasure and happiness are about the same thing.
They're close. Pleasure is the most fleeting possible thing.
Happiness is
pleasure is getting a really good shot in a laser tag game. Happiness is the day. Happiness is what that shot, not the shot, but the experience of the day, whatever. Joy is being in a prison cell and being starved and having a reason to go on. Joy exists in the darkest of times by my own probably arbitrary definition. Pleasure, I think we can agree, is the most fleeting, superfluous thing. You might even say happiness is the same. Maybe it is.
I think
but joy, I think, is something different.
Yes.
If we have a word for what that is.
So I think you can think about, this is one way to think about happiness and joy. So one of them is an experience of, I actually brought this up with you the other day. There's a way to think about the way things are as an active decision and a passive decision. Let's talk about active and passive. I think that pleasure and happiness are the same thing, experienced one actively and one passively. So joy is the active experience of choosing happiness.
Pleasure is an activity, it's active. Happiness is passive, it's a mood.
No. So think of joy as the active manifestation of a positive mood. Think of happiness as the passive experience of a joy or of a positive mood. So in that sense, joy is something that you pick. You aggressively pick despite your circumstance. Happiness is something that when you experience things passively, you don't actively make the choice, but some just happenstance, your circumstance has made you feel this way.
Well, we can definitely agree that happiness is passive. It's a mood.
Yes.
How about pleasure? I would say it's active.
No, I think that
pleasure is you put a candy into your mouth. Happiness comes after that. That's what I think.
I just don't.
You don't think it's worth defining the difference between pleasure and happiness?
Well, pleasure and happiness is the same word. They both mean the same thing. Pleasure is an experience of a positive something that happens.
All right, let's just get rid of pleasure then to make this easy.
Or we can exchange pleasure for happiness, but they're the same thing.
Okay, let's get rid of it and make it easy.
So pleasure and joy.
But I
think the difference has to do with being passive and aggressive.
But you think
one is something that you infer upon the world around you, and the other is something that the world around you infers upon you.
But you think joy is active?
Yes, you have to be active to select being joyful. Because joyful, if happiness is things are happening good to me, I'm happy about that. Then joy doesn't matter what's happening, I'm happy. I'm choosing to be happy. One is a choice that you make, and one is a feeling you feel despite your choices. So that's why I distinguish between passive and aggressive. One is the active aggressive choice despite things I'm going to be this way, and one is dependent on maybe dependence is a better word than passive. Like one is dependent on things and one is independent.
Well, if I hadn't heard what you said, I think I wouldn't have described them the same way, because if you can choose to have joy, then you can choose to be happy.
But that's joy.
I don't think so. I think joy is passive because I think it exists outside of you, to the extent that if God is in your heart, that's him doing it, which would make it passive. But then if that's the case, then you could easily choose joy. Anyway,
So this is all terminology stuff. It's not really, it's
not critical.
Think of these as an idea of there's aggressive positiveness where you are aggressively choosing to be positive, and aggressive or in a passive positiveness where it doesn't matter what's happening around you. You feel positively. They're both feelings. Now, I definitionally have joy meaning the one that you have to actively select to feel. The other one is your circumstance around you
I
dictate.
understand. Specifically
right.
when you say despite your circumstance, that's a probably more accurate description. Despite your circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
There's your circumstance and there's despite your circumstance.
Yes, and I think the circumstantial one is happiness. I think the despite your circumstance one is joy.
Yeah. Well, I can agree with that.
I think that there's not really a spectrum of in between. I think that if you are, depending on how you terminologically describe those words, if I was Webster, then I'd know for sure which one was which. But in my mind, I've always been led to believe that joy is the one that you pick. Happiness is the one that you just experience.
If I was to try to give those synonyms, I'd go ahead and say happiness is pleasure. I'd say that joy is hope. Because you can choose that despite your circumstance.
Hope.
I defined it as a reason to go on. That's how I defined it. I think hope fits that.
Hope might be another version. That might be the aggressive version of another spectrum. So hope.
What would be the other?
So
Despair?
maybe one is maybe despair. Okay, so if we're talking about spectrums here, we've talked about the spectrum of joy, of a positive feeling, joy and happiness. Joy being what you pick for yourself, happiness being what is picked for you. Hope might be the aggressive acknowledgement of foresight, where despair might be the passive acknowledgement of foresight. Despair might be the future is unknown. Therefore, I feel as though things are happening to me and they're going to just be bad. And but I don't think that that's a direct. They're not in the same spectrum. But hope, I think, has to do with the aggressive, the active choice to think of the future positively. And I don't think that that's the same as joy, because joy doesn't really pertain to the future. It's like in this present state, what I'm experiencing is happiness because I choose to.
It sounded like you described optimism when you described hope, but I don't think you meant to.
Well, hope has to do with the future.
Mm-hmm.
Optimism does too. Well, maybe hope and despair are just more strong words to describe optimism and pessimism.
On its face, I would never say hope and optimism are the same thing.
I don't think so either.
I would say optimism is I think good things will happen. Hope is I want good things to happen. If you're talking about statistically or desire, or out of desire, they're not the same.
Hope is
like you would bet on optimism. You wouldn't bet on hope, or be better statistically, whatever you would call it, to bet on optimism than to bet on hope.
I think hope is more of a behavior. It's like I will behave as if good things will happen based on my behavior. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what the opposite of that would be. I will behave as if bad things will happen. That might be despair. I don't think it is, but what's a better word for I'll behave as if bad things are going to happen in the future?
I think, I don't think it's any different, but I think the synonym for hope would be faith, because that has the same description. But maybe faith also describes I'm going to act as if bad things will happen, because it's hoping either way.
I don't know. That's tough. It's tough. I don't know that there needs to be better words to describe these ideas.
It's funny as they probably are like really obvious words.
Yeah, but if you think of things like on a spectrum, it was helpful for me to distinguish the active choice of something and the passive experience of something. I think that those two are opposites in that you can align that spectrum with many feelings or many experiences. So you can apply the aggressive and the passive spectrum to bad feeling or to malevolence. Even you can be one as a passive version of malevolence, where you've done bad things to people but you didn't know, and another one is, so like maybe malevolence is the choice to do bad things. Malevolence and ignorance, that might be the spectrum there. One is actively I'm going to pursue injuring people, and ignorance might be I'm going to passively allow for ignorance or for malevolence. No, man, it's tough. This is tough, but
you want another tough question? It sounds like you love tough questions.
Do you get what I'm getting at with the whole active and passive? There's an active way to pursue something, and there's a passive way to just experience things, and that perspective can be applied across the board. So with happiness or with positive feelings, it's joy and happiness, and one happens to you, one you make happen. In that same way, you can apply that to bad things too, and maybe the one that you make happen is malevolence because you made bad things happen, and ignorance is when bad things happen, and it's just because you allow it to. But I don't know. I don't know exactly. Can you think of a better word for the passive version of bad things happen? Because I think malevolence is the active participation in bad things happening. I just need a passive word for that.
I would agree that I think malevolence is active.
Yeah.
I mean,
Can you think of a better word than ignorance to describe a passive allowing of bad things to happen?
Yeah, that's a good question.
That's what I mean about, like, I wish that people would think of things in that perspective, because that's such a better way to look at things.
There's got to be a word for it.
It's actually that idea as a spectrum is the operable way to talk about free will in our dimension, as we were talking before. In some sense, the free will that you talk about, or the way that I describe it as, it's our experience of free will. Now, it's not really free, but in both in how we have to experience the world, there are ways in which we can actively involve ourselves in the future, or passively just experience things. And a lot of the stories about what's noble to do have to do with, doesn't matter, I'm not going to let life happen to me. I'm going to aggressively pick things, even if they're the wrong ones. That's what the archetypical hero is. Anyway, so that idea that I have in my head about active and passive as a spectrum, it goes to bolster your point of free will, and also goes to bolster the fact that I do believe in free will on the level that we have, that on the plane which we live. What was your? Does that make you think anything, or did you have another question about something else?
I got another question.
Are you just so tired of this whole active passive conversation?
Yes.
Okay.
It's kind of related to free will. Here's a hard question.
Okay.
Where do babies go when they die?
That's not a hard question.
Oh, where do they go?
Are you talking between heaven and hell?
Yes, between heaven and hell, I mean.
Well, I think they go to heaven.
You think they go to heaven?
Yeah.
Why?
I think it has to do with God's grace.
Okay, well, I'm not trying to be an asshole. I'm just challenging you. Where does God's grace end? Why does it extend to adults? Why don't all adults go to heaven when they die?
I think it has something to do with the fact that babies know God in ways that people don't. And the more of the world you experience, the less you know God.
I won't say I disagree with that, but wouldn't that lend to the idea that we're born good? Because I wouldn't say that.
I want to make sure that I'm not saying things I don't believe to be true. And so I'm trying to think about that.
If you haven't thought about it, that's fine. I mean,
I have thought about it, and my conclusion was, yeah, they go to heaven. And now I'm gonna have to retrace my steps. What do you think while I'm doing that?
If someone asked me that, so where do babies go when they die? I'd say, I don't know. And I go, I like to think, or I think, or my best guess is, which who knows how good that is, probably shit. That's where I stand. I asked my mom that when I was a kid. I think she had a good answer, which is kind of what I've held on to since. I haven't thought about it very critically, so I'm open to go back and forth. But I think she said, I think God knows. It was about free will and fate and all that. She's like, I think God knows what they would choose in the future. He knows where their hearts are, because time isn't linear, or time isn't
right.
Then he judges them accordingly. I'm like, I like the answer that all babies go to heaven, but that's more realistic in my mind.
I can see that.
God knows.
Well, I think it's in Matthew. I think in the book of Matthew.
Like, yeah, you judge someone for haven't done it yet, because God doesn't work that way. That's how time is limited to us. And that's cruel. But anyway, go ahead.
There's a passage in one of the Gospels, and Jesus allows the little children to come to me, and they ask him why. And I'm so unfamiliar with the Bible now that I don't remember the response, but it had something to do with...
The kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these.
Exactly. And it was just talking about children. And so I believe that the Bible has said, and Jesus in the Bible has said, that the kingdom of heaven is for these guys.
It sounds like it confirms your idea that they're more good.
Right.
Maybe, but I gotta, that's a dangerous idea. What if good is ignorance? I don't think it's right to say that, but
no, it's not.
I think you're right at the very least to say that the world corrupts you. Obviously, I mean,
well, and then at some point, I think that you can remember the point in which your bad decisions weighed on you. When you're a child, this is a very interesting idea I've talked about with, like, I think it was my ex or something, but we talked about how when you were kids, when you did something bad, you felt bad because you were being punished. You didn't feel bad because you did something bad. At a certain point, your conscience develops and you start feeling guilt about things. And I feel like when you start hearing your conscience talk to you, I believe conscience is just another word for the Holy Spirit. I think once the Holy Spirit talks to you as an individual instead of just to your parents as parents,
yeah, I don't
to
know
punish
if I
you.
agree with that.
I know, but like there's an idea there because you don't.
It's an idea. It's not what I default to. I guess I do default. I say default because I haven't thought about it critically, and I'm not ready to die on the hill.
Right.
I think we're bad, and we have to be taught to be good. We're born bad, and that conscience only develops as a result of parenting.
Yes.
If the parents weren't there, you would feel until 25. I have no parents, no moral guidelines. I'd feel bad about getting caught. I never feel bad about the bad I did. I have to be taught that.
Well, and that conflict. Well, I believe ultimately everybody's bad, no matter how many good things you do. You can do every good thing ever, and you're bad because what you were created is a bad thing.
And you were created as a bad thing. That would be a crude answer, though.
I believe that everyone who has gotten into heaven is bad. That's what grace means. It means that despite your badness, you're allowed in, and it has to do with God's grace. So
I'm trying to reconcile that with, we had this conversation before, and you were saying good and bad exist outside of you.
Well, they exist ultimately outside of you, but you participate in their existence, and you can't be good. The only good thing comes from above. It's the Bible. And so it's like, no, we are bad. All kids are bad. All adults are bad. So why do any of us go to heaven? That's the ultimate question, right? And so when you ask, how do babies get there? I was like, well, yeah, I believe so. And it's like, why would God not allow babies to get there when he allows bad people to get in there? He allows bad adults.
I'm still trying to reconcile the two.
Well, you can't reconcile bad things getting into heaven at all unless you believe in grace. So first of all, grace has to be put on the table.
Well, then if you had said that before we had the conversation, then your answer would be, because my question was, what's the difference between good people who do bad things and bad people who do good things?
And I think it's a dumb question.
You'd say there are only bad people who can do some good things.
There are only bad people.
Right.
There are no good people.
But you didn't say that. You said,
well, that's what I believe. That's what I say now.
Okay.
There are only bad people. And they can do good things or bad things. So my answer about do babies get into heaven is kind of an obvious yes, because why would he allow...
Well, I get that then.
Babies who haven't had the chance.
Stance. If he's going to let every other bad person to heaven, then how bad can babies be? Not very bad at all.
Well, it's not. I don't know that there are levels of bad either. I think I'll just
fine,
plainly bad.
Bad minus some good things you might have done.
Right. And so, but like, I don't know. If grace is for the worst criminal that there is, then it's going to be for a little baby, a little bad baby. Doesn't matter.
I feel kind of dickish for just throwing in some hard questions.
Why?
Because I just feel like
They're not hard.
I think they're hard questions.
I don't think so. We're talking about stuff that might not exist anyway. We're talking about heaven and God and stuff, and I believe they do. I try to behave as if they do, but we can't prove that they do. You know, this is all a bunch of theories.
Well, then I'm curious what you think is a hard question. What's something that you think about and just like, I don't know.
Well, I don't know anything.
Or that you're not comfortable with. What's a hard question?
Well, the hardest question for me, I've still worked through it. I have worked, and to me, we talked about this the other night. You were talked about a lot of the things that I just don't understand, I tend to ignore. I'm not saying that it's true all the time because you've obviously thought through a lot of the things you think. But I'm different in that if something bothers me a lot, then I'll think about it until I have the best conclusion that I can come to with my limited knowledge, and it's very, very limited, but until I feel comfortable with it, I can live my everyday life in the comfort of knowing I've thought this through as much as I can. I still discover new things. That's not what I'm talking about, but I don't have a lot of things where I don't feel like I'm on stable ground. Now, there are some ground that doesn't mean I'm going to go evangelizing to everybody and saying I know all the answers, because first of all, it's not my place. I'm not the truth giver. I can hopefully say truth when I'm asked, but I don't go jumping out with these opinions. The thing that if a stranger walked up to me and said, what do you believe about this? The answer that I would have the least stability in my grounding has to probably do with being gay.
So what's the question?
Is being gay wrong or something like that? That's probably the question that if somebody asked me, I'd feel the least comfortable answering.
Interesting. I mean, I wouldn't say it's an easy question. I have an answer, however right or wrong it may be, but I have an opinion on it that I've formed.
Right, and I do too. But of all of the other ones,
of all the answers you have, it is your least stable, least.
So here, and this is the reason why. We won't dive into this too deeply this time, probably. But of all the other topics, like why do bad things happen to good people? Those questions that people ask: why do bad things happen? What is God? Where does He live? Why isn't He here? Those kinds of things. Those ones. They're polarizing, and it's hard for a lot of people to hear my answers because they're just so bizarre. Even like you are like
insufficient to us because
we can't understand other perspectives, right? We can only speculate,
which is I'm interrupting you. I'm sorry, but on a less smaller dimension, my free will answer irritates people for the same reason.
Yeah.
Sorry, continue.
But all of those don't have to directly do with the spectrum of loving people, and exactly. Being gay actually does. Being gay is specifically you love this person for whatever reason. Maybe it's a sexual love, but it's on the spectrum of love. And if love is a good thing, to try to, I don't know, it just gets muddy really quickly, especially because that's the strongest emotion people feel. So, and the same thing could be said about why God allows bad things to happen and everything. Those have to do with love as well. But the only reason I say that about the gay question, that it's the one I feel least stable on, is because of other people. It's not because I don't feel any less.
It's naturally polarizing. It's not on you though. It's just
I feel like if I stood before God and He goes, "What do you think have you thought things through in a way that you feel comfortable with?" I would say, yeah, I think I have.
Well, I only wanted to ask you what the hardest question you have is, because that was sufficient for me. You can answer your question now if you want, but you don't have to.
Nah, not right now.
Okay. Then we'll save that for next time. I have a topic I want to talk about, and it would fit into that. So I will shut up about it, and I will write that down for next time.
Yeah. Did I assuage you with my whole free will from the fifth dimension kind of idea?
Well, you certainly didn't get me to completely disagree with you, because technically they're not at odds with one another in this dimension.
Yeah.
But we obviously don't agree on everything. And,
yeah.
And you said something like that when I said even God can't please everyone. And you said that's so interesting that you think that way. And then you said, I can't remember the words. It's like I'm so glad that you don't agree with me on things. Something like that.
Yeah.
It's like, that's interesting to say. I mean, I feel the same way.
Well, and this would be a fun exercise, just thinking of those two different feelings that we have about things, or ideas we have about free will as an idea, trying to simply summarize the difference between them. This is ultimately, because if there is a difference, and if we've landed on either side, then the difference should matter. And why do I land on this side and you land on this side? And the question, I think the difference is God's involvement. And I think your theory is that it's a largely uninvolved God. He created the game. He spun it and got it all working. Now it plays itself, and I watch, and I love these people, and I love this game because I made it, but I'm going to just watch. And I believe, okay.
He does interact, but he never possesses or becomes the avatar of a person, if that makes sense. He doesn't join the game and do a POV. He never does that. He'll do everything else, but he'll never take over a character.
And I believe, and that makes sense to me. I totally get that idea, where the reason that I tip on the other end of that spectrum, that scale, is because I believe that He inhabits literally everything, because He created everything, and we're all composed of Him. So why would He have a problem inhabiting? He inhabits everything anyway. We are every part of everything.
Yeah, I would say in a more crude way, God is reality.
Yeah,
and we're all part of reality. Therefore, we're all part of Him. That's like a less spiritual answer.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then again, it goes back to what is experience, and then you could the ultimate grounds in which that I can state my point, and you can't really disagree because I can't prove it anyway, is the idea that we can experience stuff and it's real to us. Whereas God can, if he possesses me and I feel this compulsion to do something good, then I believe he literally did inhabit me to do that. But for me, it was, I made the choice to do this, and it was a real experience as I did something. So it's real. Like we're saying the same thing. I understand it
completely. Yeah. To put it to the listeners, I'll bring up the artificial intelligence analogy again. This is sufficient for what we're talking about, but imagine this becomes sentient. The robot thinks it's alive. Now we can have this conversation again. Does this robot get rights? What is this? What is this being? No, seriously. Yeah. No, seriously. That's the issue we're dealing with on a much more crude dimension. That's literally it. So,
yeah.
Anyway, yeah, man, good talk.
I think if we actually had the brain power and the energy, we would follow that thread to be like, then whose responsibility is for those robots' rights? And then you'd come to the same conclusion I have, which is like, well, then we'd have the responsibility of maintaining ourselves, and we can't, because we can't maintain ourselves. Only God can do that.
Like if we followed our stances to conclusion, right, and exacted it in this dimension, I would say, let the robot do what it's gonna do, and you would say, what would you say?
Let the robot think he's going to do what he's going to do, and I still am doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that if we thought it through and actually weighed all the cons, if my theory is right, you'd land where I'd land. Well,
technically we would agree.
We would have to if we knew how to think it through.
Easier bit of analogy. If these robots literally lived on their own planet, that we made these robots, put them on their own planet. They don't exist in our society. We don't affect each other. Then it'd be a bit more realistic. But whatever.
Yeah. But I believe that the robot can be in alignment with its creator too, which is kind of cool.
They can have Wi-Fi with their creator.
Yeah. Yep. That's it.
All right. Yeah.
Hey, not bad. An hour 16:30.
That's pretty bad. Not bad.
Man, I love these conversations.
Yeah.
Fucking invigorated right now.
Yeah.
Fuck yeah.
I feel like I got something off.
It's like
less edgy now.
Yeah. Post PNC.
No, hold on a second. We can do a pun for that. Incorporate nut or a pun or a synonym or similar sounding word.
It's PPC. It's post philosophy clarity.
Maybe next time. I'm a little burnt, honestly. The title for the next topic I'd like to talk about is moral authority. I'm going to write that down. Write it down. All right. Well, thank you guys for listening. It has been fun. Be good. Don't create any AI. And if you do, good luck.
Yeah, because you're going to have to figure out how to...
You're going to have to answer these questions that we asked before you do that.
And if you're as prepared as us, you're not going to do a good job.